Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today, the Sikh Spectrum has come to London, and I've come to interview Navjot Sidhu, who is a QC. We'll talk about what QC means and barrister's life and so on. But I do want to say that he is actually the only Sikh criminal lawyer in the UK. So, Navjot, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Navjot, let's start with my opening question, which I ask most people when I interview them, is to give us a short profile about yourself.
Gurdeep, I'm a barrister. In fact, I specialised in criminal work, and I've been doing this for about 20 years. My own background is I am born and brought up in Southall, one of the largest concentrations of the Sikh community in this country. My parents came to this country in 1964 with my two elder brothers, and I'm the youngest of those three, and the first to have been born outside India. So my name, Navjot, which means new light, was given to me by my parents because they wanted to make the point that I was in fact a new light for our family when they were settling into this country. So I have been to school in Southall, state schools. My primary school is one that I'm very much attached to. I've been the chair of governors there for the last 17 years. And I continue to be very involved in community politics and community affairs. And I live now in Ealing in West London, and my work has taken me to many different places, but over the course of the last number of years I've been, I think, through a very good education. Having had an excellent start from my schools in Southall, I then went to Oxford University, where I studied politics and philosophy and economics, and after that I went to the London School of Economics and studied international political economy. So my educational background is very broad-based. Eventually I decided that, in fact, the right way forward for me as a career would be in the law, and I particularly wanted to be an advocate because it was my interest to represent people who needed help and needed support. And the work that I do takes me into the criminal courts, and the sort of stuff that I do is very, very serious crime. So we're talking about murder cases and terrorism, and very big frauds and cases like that. So essentially my own background has been one that comes from a very supportive community in Southall, which has given me a very strong sense of my own identity today. My parents worked throughout their lives. They still live in Southall. My father was a teacher, and he was also a writer in Punjabi, a very well-known writer, Pritam Singh Sidhu, and he's written about 12 novels, all in Punjabi, which have been intended for the consumption by the Sikh community mainly, and by Punjabi people generally. But it's about the themes of immigration and settling in this country and all the difficulties which our community has faced. And my mother has been a psychiatric nurse all through her career as well. Both of them are now retired.
Fascinating. I mean, you've come from a background that's very educationalist, shall I say. What did you always want to become a lawyer then? And by the way, is lawyer the right term to use in the UK? I always get confused with Americans and how they term it in the UK.
Well, there are two kinds of lawyers in this country. There are solicitors, of whom there are probably more than 150,000 in the whole country, and there are barristers, and barristers are roughly about 15,000 in number. So lawyers is a collective word to describe people from either of the two sides of the profession. The barristers generally specialise in advocacy, so the people that you see on television who are wearing wigs on their heads and gowns, they tend to be barristers, although solicitors can also do that now because they have the rights to appear in the higher courts. So people who want to become barristers generally are those who feel that their contribution as lawyers is to be speaking in court, in the higher courts, on behalf of their clients. And of course, our community and Punjabis and generally Indians have a long and venerable tradition of producing some great lawyers, many of whom came here to study the bar exams, including Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and others who were all involved in the freedom movement for India before we got our independence. And I feel, in a sense, that I'm simply one of the latest additions in a long line of individuals who felt that studying law and practicing as lawyers, whether as barristers or solicitors, is one of the best ways to serve your community and to serve society as a whole.
What is the difference between a barrister and a QC?
A barrister is, a QC is a barrister. You achieve the status of QC, which stands for Queen's Counsel, once you have worked as a barrister a very long time and you're recognized as having been one of the best of your generation. So, for example, becoming a QC requires you to go through a very demanding selection process, at the end of which you may be awarded the title of QC. Approximately the top 8% of barristers in this country are given this title of QC. So it's very difficult to attain and takes a lot of time, a lot of hard work, and you have to demonstrate that you've got a certain skill and talent to warrant receiving this particular accolade.
So the picture that's behind you, is that the day that, you know, sort of inauguration day of becoming a QC, or that you're holding this red sort of, you know, envelope?
It is. That's a picture taken with my wife on the day that I was appointed as a Queen's Counsel, as a QC. And you can see that I'm wearing a very long wig and some rather strange-looking clothes, which are very traditional, and they are worn by those who attend a ceremony. The ceremony takes place in the Palace of Westminster, and it also takes place in the Royal Courts of Justice. And at that ceremony, you are recognised amongst your year group of those who also have taken silk, as we call it, as being one of the best of your generation. So it was a very proud day for me. I had my wife and my two daughters with me on that day to celebrate with me.
So students nowadays studying law, and when I go around to universities, I find lots of Sikh children studying law.
Yes.
Do you think that there's too many of them studying it? I mean, I usually get this complaint that afterwards we can't find jobs or we can't find internships and so on. Do you think there's a, you know, overwhelming number of, you know, students now studying law or not?
Law has always been, Gurdeep, a very popular subject, because it is what we call a vocational degree. It's a degree that takes you to a particular profession. And amongst the Asian community in this country, there's always been an interest, of course, in their sons and daughters becoming part of the higher professions, whether they are in medicine, or in law, or in pharmacy, or in any other profession which requires a very high skill level. So I'm not surprised at all that we still have a lot of young men and women from the Asian community coming into the legal profession. But the challenges to get in are quite high. It's not easy to enter this particular occupation. So we have many law graduates, but not all of them, in fact only a small number of them, are able to penetrate the profession of the law, and still fewer, in fact, are able to get into the bar and become barristers. There are lots of hurdles, and we're working very hard to see if we can eliminate a lot of these hurdles, but it's difficult because when you have too many people wanting to enter a profession where there are a limited number of jobs, then inevitably there are going to be many people who are disappointed if they can't make it through. But a lot of my own work, Gurdeep, is spent outside when I'm not in court, when I'm not actually concentrating on my cases. I spend a lot of my other time working to help young people through the university system and through colleges to improve their chances of being successful in coming to the bar and in coming into the solicitor's profession as well, because I want to see more diversity within our profession. I want to...
Okay, so that's an interesting point you've made. Do you have to be a QC before you can become a judge?
No, you can become a judge without becoming a QC. And in fact, most judges are not QCs. QCs who, as I said, effectively are the elite of the legal profession where barristers are concerned particularly, generally speaking, enjoy their work so much doing cases and representing clients that they don't want to actually become judges, because once you become a judge, you're going to be sitting on a high table, overseeing a court, and your responsibilities are obviously huge. You don't want to make a mistake. And many QCs and many barristers generally enjoy so much the cut and thrust of being in trials that for them to end up being a judge, for them seems to be not the way that they want to move forward with their professions, because it would be, for them, perhaps too isolating and too lonely an experience,
right,
spending all their lives as judges.
But so far, as far as I know, there's only ever been 2 Sikh judges. The most famous one of those is obviously Judge Mota Singh.
Yes.
But there is also another judge, Rabinder Singh,
Yes.
who's appeared on the scene in the last sort of few years. So, I mean, do you think there should be more Sikh judges, or have they been given the opportunity, or they just haven't gone down that road then?
No, I think that there is a huge amount of talent from the Sikh legal community and from the Asian legal community generally. There is not enough progress that has been made in making sure that those talented people are able to become judges. In fact, the statistics which have come out from the government, from the Ministry of Justice, only published very recently, are showing that there has been almost no progress at all over the last 10 years in making sure that we have a judiciary, that's the judges, which is truly diverse, which reflects the legal profession and reflects society as a whole. So in fact there is an urgent need for more Sikh lawyers and more Asian lawyers generally to be given opportunities to become judges. And we are looking very hard at the selection processes to see whether there are problems which are keeping those Asian lawyers back. One of the roles that I play, Gurdeep, is that I'm joint chair of the Society of Asian Lawyers, and that is the biggest representative body of Asian lawyers in the UK. We have a vast membership, and with that huge membership comes a lot of responsibility. And one of the most important things that we are battling for at the moment is to ensure that there are not unfair barriers placed in front of Asian lawyers, preventing them from going up through the system and becoming our judges of the future. Because we know that unless you have a properly diverse judiciary, you will have decisions being made by senior judges which may be slanted in some way because they don't have the experience and understanding to make fair decisions irrespective of the sorts of people who appear in courts, whether they are Asian defendants, black defendants, or white defendants. And what we're finding on the latest research which has come out from the government is that there is in fact still a very real problem in the way that judges are treating defendants who come from different backgrounds. So if you are, for example, an Asian defendant, you are more likely to be sent to prison straight away for an offence that the same offence, if there's a white defendant being sentenced for, that defendant is less likely to go to prison straight away than you are. Now this is a problem, because it means that when judges are looking at Asian defendants and black defendants, on certain examples and in certain instances, they are treating them more harshly than they would be treating a white defendant.
Okay, but you wouldn't say that for someone who's committed an offence that he should be trialled by a coloured or a Sikh judge or a black judge for that argument because he's a ethnic minority offender.
Not at all. I think no one wants to see a society in which you have a jury that is exactly of the same ethnic background as the defendant, or judges who are from the same ethnic background by requirement. That would be an absurd society. We're living in a very cosmopolitan society in this country. We have a huge amount of diversity. There are significant numbers of Asian people and black people living here who are well established and settled and who are making a very positive contribution. What we are asking for is to make sure that throughout all the professions and all the occupations in this country, wherever possible, there should be no barriers, which are unfair barriers, put in front of our young people if they want to enter those professions and move up. And what we are seeing, however, is that with judges in the UK, unfortunately, even though Asians and black people have been in the legal profession for a very long time, our judges are not reflecting the progress that we have made.
Yeah.
And the difficulty, Gurdeep, is that judges who come from a certain type of background, if they're white, they're middle class, they've been to public school, they probably went to Oxford or Cambridge, they have a certain sensibility, they have a certain perspective on life. It's not necessarily conscious on their part. It's just that they may prefer dealing with people who have a similar background, and by the same token, they may feel they can't relate to people who come from a very different background to theirs.
Right.
So people who are Asians, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, who are in court in front of them, they may look at them and not understand what's going on in the background. And one of the points that I've made many times when I've represented clients who are being sentenced by judges is that I say to judges, if you understand my client's background, then you'll appreciate that there are many other people in his extended family, in his local community, within the social system that he comes from, who are going to be affected by what the judge decides to do with that individual defendant. So if somebody is sent to prison for a long time, the damage that is caused is not just to him, it will be to his family members, to the family reputation, to the community at large, and the repercussions for his relatives and friends or anyone closely associated with him can be very profound. So if, for example, you have a young man who's a Sikh in his mid-20s who's committed an offence of violence or drugs or something like that, his sister may be affected, his brother may be affected when they come to get married, because people will say, well, we heard that your son was in court and he's gone to prison for some terrible offence. It's not that I'm asking that they be treated more leniently. It's that when a judge is looking at an individual defendant, he must look at that defendant with all their characteristics. And being colourblind in a way that makes a judge disregard factors that are important actually works against justice, not in favour of it.
That's an interesting point, because I've never really looked at it from that angle. But now that you've explained it, but do you not think there's a point where we should maybe educate the judges to a certain degree, not just in court, like you're saying, to bring it up, but maybe even beforehand, rather than waiting till the case comes up?
Indeed, and you're quite right, because Gurdeep, education and training for judges is essential when they come from such a different background. In fact, I can tell you this, there are programs already in place and have been operating for a number of years, which are provided by the Ministry for Justice and by the judiciary's own governing body, which are intended to make sure that judges are not ignorant about the importance of difference when it comes to defendants in front of them. So there is training already in place for judges so that they don't make mistakes. The difficulty is that judges take time to learn these things, and that's not surprising to hear, because many of these judges are in their 60s, they've lived their lives over a long period of time, and they're very entrenched in their habits and in their thinking. And re-educating people like that not to have discriminatory attitudes when they are dealing with individual defendants who may be Asian or black is not an easy thing to do. So the problem we're having is we've got the programs, but some of the judges are not learning from those programs well enough to stop making decisions which are almost subconsciously sometimes based on the race or ethnicity or religion of the defendant they're dealing with.
Okay, no, that's fine. I wanted to also ask about yourself in terms of your political career, because you did stand as the Labour councillor for many years, and then you also tried to stand for whatever the process is for electing a Labour candidate in the Ealing area. I wanted to ask you, is that a field you want to go into? And of course, how come you lost in that, race for becoming a candidate?
Well, Gurdeep, I've always had a very sincere and serious interest in politics. My father and mother come from quite political families and were involved in the post-independence period, so I learned as a young boy the importance of politics in creating transformation in society. And the Sikh community in particular has always been interested in going into politics. We have many, many Sikh councillors all around the country, and we have some MPs as well who are from a Sikh background. My own interest really in politics came about from my upbringing in Southall. Southall, of course, went through many difficult changes over a number of decades. We had two riots, one in 1979 and one in 1981, when the National Front came to Southall to disrupt our community and to cause hostility and create friction, and we had to fight back. And I was a teenage boy during those years, so much of my thinking about politics has been fueled by the discrimination which, of course, the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the Muslim community has faced in this country at the hands of the right-wing politicians and racists who have made life extremely difficult. So I studied politics at the University of Oxford. My interest has always been in making my own contribution to our community in politics if I can. I was a Labour councillor, elected in 1994, and I served for 4 years in Ealing Council, which is my local council. I also worked for Ealing Council as a researcher for a while in order to become more familiar with the way in which decisions are made by the bureaucracy. And in 2007, when sadly Pyara Singh Khabra died, there was a by-election which was arranged in Southall, and I stood in that selection process, and so did so many other people as well, but I was shortlisted down to the last two, and I lost against Vrinder Sharma, who's the current MP, by only 190 votes. It was my genuine passion, if I could, to represent my own community where I was born and brought up. I genuinely felt that it was time for a younger person to come forward who could act as a bridge between the younger Asian community and the older Asian community, somebody who understood the picture from both sides, who could go into Parliament and argue the case for our rights and our entitlements and to protect our communities from arbitrary treatment by central government.
So let me stop you there.
Yes.
So will you stand again then or not?
Gurdeep, if I'm given an opportunity to serve in Parliament as a Member of Parliament, I would, of course, love to do that.
Right.
For me, representing people as a councillor over several years, representing thousands of clients that I've been looking after for the last 20 years, has given me a sense of responsibility to the community. It seems that if we don't encourage younger Asian people into the highest level of political representation, then we are doing a great disservice to our community, because these younger people understand the system. They've been educated in the system. They know how to navigate their way so as to ensure that our communities are protected and that we get the resources, which is really crucial, that will make life better. It is crucial that older Asian people who have given a great service to their community know when the time has come to step aside and create those vacancies.
It's
so
true.
that younger people can come
I mean, Navjot, I think sometimes what happens is we have the same issue in the Gurdwaras. There was a time when you need to move on and maybe support the youngsters coming in. So that's the analogy that I can do, where up and down the country I've seen numerous Gurdwaras where the elders just don't want to move and they won't allow the youngsters that chance. Yeah, they would think it would be in their advantage if they did that. And that's one thing that I've picked up. But I know I'm running out of time, and I do want to ask you two more questions. One is a general question, rather than being so sort of serious, is about your interest or your hobbies. I mean, your busy schedule, and we've met a few times now, and I think that you're always running around doing this work, you know, on the barrister side. What is it that you do to relax?
Relaxation for me is not easy to find, because the work that I do, in fact, I enjoy so much. In some senses, my work is my relaxation. As far as spare time is concerned, it's mainly concentrated with my family. I have two young daughters, and I'm married to a professional woman who's the Director of Development at a large university in West London. Her name is Luna. Her own parents, in fact, interestingly, come from a different sort of background. They're both in acting. Her late father was Harpal Tawana, who was the director of the movie Long Da Lishkara, which I'm sure many of your viewers have seen.
Oh, okay.
And my mother-in-law was the lead actress who played the role of Raj Baba's mother in that movie Long Da Lishkara. But my in-laws have played a very big part in contributing to ensuring that the Punjabi language and the Sikh community and its history and religion are kept alive through the theatre and through movies. And indeed, my father, I spoke about, has been writing for a very long time. So I come from this sort of a background where, for me, enjoyment comes from doing something that I think is positive for my community. All of the extracurricular work that I do, working in Southall, I'm chair of governors of my old school, have been for a very long time, working with students, gives me a great deal of personal satisfaction. For me, the concept of serving the community is actually what is the essence of being a good Sikh. Being a good Sikh is not about necessarily spending a lot of time in the Gurdwara. For me, the way I was brought up about Sikhism was to understand that public service, serving your community, going out there and making change in a constructive way is what being a good Sikh is about. So when I do these things, Gurdeep, outside my normal day job, I feel that I'm doing something which actually reflects well on the Sikh community. And if there are more people like me, and there are so many of us who are doing these things, who come to public attention, what they do by making their positive contribution is that they are a great advertisement for the Sikh community. Every time one of us goes on television, goes on a radio broadcast and projects well the things that we are doing to help people, that is what then is seen by the public as being a service. And that service is the essence, I've said it once, I'll say it again, it's the essence of what makes you a good Sikh.
No, I agree. I think that you've got that pretty nailed on the head about what makes a good Sikh. What is your personal aspiration to be in the next, I don't know, 5, 10 years? It sounds like a very cliche sort of question that you asked on an interview, but where would you like to see yourself in the coming, in the future?
If I carry on doing what I think is positive work, both in the law and outside the law, if I can support the community with the concerns that they have, if they have campaigns that are worth fighting for, then I'm making my own positive contribution. That's how I see my life evolving. If I'm able to represent people, Gurdeep, in a political sphere, and I do something that brings credit to my community, then I've done something worthwhile. For me, life, of course, like for everyone, is a short period of time. I want people to think, what can you do positively to help other people in your community? I want Sikhs to continue doing what they've been doing. You heard only recently that Sikhs went down to Somerset to help with the flooding. These sorts of actions on the part of our community represent to the wider country the great service that Sikhs have given throughout their history, not just through the army, the police, through the civil service, but also in the great professions that we have moved into.
Okay, well that comes to the end of our interview, and I want to thank Navjot Sidhu for allowing us to use, the chambers, if that's what you call them, and I hope to actually do a follow-up interview with him, especially if he stands as a candidate. I think it would be great if young Sikhs stood for whichever political party, but at least to represent our community, especially the youngsters. And I think, Navjot, I want to say thank you for allowing me to come here. I know you have a very busy schedule. So with that in mind, I hope this has been an interesting Sikh Spectrum. So I'll say Fateh together. Waheguru Ji Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.